Hello, my name is Elizabeth, and I was a McGillicuddy Humanities Center Fellow in 2021. The name of my project is Putting the Story Back into History, the Hidden Power of Historical Fiction. My project started originally as a trip into historical fiction, critiquing its historical inaccuracies, and then once I discovered the historical inaccuracies and compared them to actual historical records, I was going to take them and turn those into TikToks and disseminate those among a more popular general audience to expose the inaccuracy of historical fiction and try to educate the general populace on the truth, the historical truth. However, when I started to actually do some research and get into the sort of the core of my project, I discovered that I was a bit unnuanced in my approach towards historical fiction. I learned that historical fiction actually has a immeasurable amount of benefit towards general audiences despite historical inaccuracies that might be present within historical fiction. As it turns out, many people actually really don't enjoy the study of history. They find lectures and reading these dense texts to be very challenging or complex, and it doesn't keep their attention the same way going to a movie theater and seeing some visual epic that it engages them. And as I started reading the research and the works of other scholars, it turned out that there was actually a huge benefit for historical fiction in classroom pedagogy and all that sort of stuff. One great example that I pulled on was a professor at a university, I can't remember, but she made a whole class that was centered and focused on using works of historical fiction to help students launch off critical analyses and discussions about actual historical events and historical figures. And it turned out that her class was more engaged than she had ever seen before. She had record high enrollment numbers just because people who had never had an interest in history before wanted to take her class because they had watched the show it was centered around, or they had read the book that it was centered around. And that made me realize that critiquing historical fiction solely based off of the fact that it isn't 100% accurate wasn't the right approach to begin with, and it was forgetting all the merit of having a more simplistic and visual representation of the past, that it does much more to immerse people and bring people into history and get them to engage with history. You can talk a lot about how important something is for pedagogy, and you can use the examples of other people, but obviously I had to introduce my own examples for how historical fiction could be beneficial to classrooms. And one of the routes I took was lining up, I watched a TV show called Reign, about Mary Queen of Scots, which I heavily used history and historiography surrounding Mary Queen of Scots for my examples. I watched parts of her show, and I lined up when the show began airing for there are 4 different seasons, with spikes in Mary Queen of Scots' Wikipedia page, and people searching for her Wikipedia page, searching for information on her. And there is a direct correlation between when her show would air, like begin a season, her page on Wikipedia would spike in views, which is a means in which other historians have used to show the significance in that historical fiction has on ushering people towards searching for more information about the past. They're not necessarily replacements for any form of formal or more traditional education, but they act as stepping stones that launch people into studying a subject that they may have never thought to study before, but all of a sudden now they're watching this show or they're reading this book and they're very interested in it, and they want to know if the past lines up with what they're being sold for a story. And so that is one means in which historical fiction helps people engage with the past and learn more about the past, that you can tangibly see in what people search for on the internet to just simply learn more. Another thing about historical fiction and this whole issue with accuracy that I had to delve into was the fact that, as I've said before, accuracy is just not the way you should go about looking at these historical films. They will never be accurate for a whole number of reasons, whether it's costuming, actors not wanting to do certain things, being limited by the cost of what it takes to make a historically accurate medieval set or any set from any time period. There are going to be numerous amount of roadblocks for production crews and novelists who struggle to find any form of primary source material depending on the time period they're writing about. And so that's why many people have suggested authenticity is a better means in which you should look for the value in historical fiction. Authenticity over accuracy, I've spent a great deal of time talking about this, and I've maybe tired a lot of people with my talking about it. But essentially, accuracy is dependent on hard facts, whereas authenticity is more attached to feelings, feeling authentic, feeling as though the film or the novel fits the time period that it is trying to capture, but not necessarily having to be 100% accurate to its core. And when you think of things like that, instead of looking for little insignificant details or even some maybe larger details, it still gives room for historical fiction to take a more front and central role in how people learn about the past. I've had people ask me if that means that historical fiction is, it's okay for it to be grossly inaccurate, or it's okay for them to just fill gaps without having any basis for that. And I would argue that that's not the truth. It's not acceptable for that to happen. And that there are some works of historical fiction that will do many things that feel grossly out of place, and that takes away from their power and their merit. But just because there are few that twist things in such gross ways that we can't believe them, doesn't mean that other works of historical fiction don't have so much to offer. Once again, pulling on Mary, Queen of Scots, I also read a novel in tandem with the show that captures the life of Mary, Queen of Scots in a historical fiction perspective. And despite the fact that many of the minute details of her life have to be speculated and pulled together by writers and creative minds, doesn't mean that these novels or these shows don't pitch incredibly important themes about Mary, Queen of Scots as a monarch, and this can be said for a multitude of other works of historical fiction and figures. One detail that I think of is that Mary, Queen of Scots was a profoundly religious queen. And when she met her untimely fate, thanks to Queen Elizabeth I, through execution, many believed that she was a martyr and that she died for her religious beliefs, despite that not being what Queen Elizabeth said. This is something that is pitched in both novels and TV series, movies about Mary, Queen of Scots. She was profoundly Catholic. She died for her beliefs, and people loved her for her beliefs, and we see it sprinkled throughout her life, and that's a core theme that people can pull and extract from these shows, these works of historical fiction, that they may not necessarily extract from looking at a 17th century print of her, or looking at some portrait, or even reading a letter written by her. It's harder to extract those little details that seem small but are actually so significant to how we perceive these people and how we perceive them within their context and in their time. So that's just another way that historical fiction has a great impact on how people who aren't as passionate about history can get into the past and learn about these core details, or even just small themes. And they can take them, that information with them. I myself have had numerous times where I've watched a piece of historical fiction, or I've read something, maybe played a video game, and I found myself sitting in some undergraduate lecture somewhere here on campus. And I think to myself, oh my gosh, I already know this because I watched this movie or I read this book, and I can take that with me, and that'll be helpful on an exam, or that'll be helpful in the future if I want to pull on that information. And that's exactly what people are doing when they consume historical fiction. They seek out more information to help either solidify what they saw in the work of fiction, or they find information that contradicts it, and they hold on to that. Even if it's small and it's not really, their biggest passion, it's something that they've learned and it's in their head now, and that's a beautiful thing, and that's something that I think historical fiction isn't always recognized for. And in fact, I wasn't recognizing it for doing that when I started this project. But over the past few months that I've worked on it, I've learned that I was completely wrong, and I'm okay with admitting that. So the ultimate takeaway of my project is that historical fiction is not something that we should be disregarding. Historical fiction is in fact something that we should be embracing in classroom settings, because they hold so much merit for teaching themes of the past to people who already struggle to want to engage with history. My project is about getting people excited to engage with history. My name is Elizabeth Dalton. I am a 2021 McGillicuddy Humanities Center Fellow, and thank you for watching.